everybody.
Hello and welcome to Eponibus Unum. I'm Etan.
And I'm Dan.
And I'm laughing because we are having the most ridiculous time with Zoom. On today's episode, we're joined by activist J.W. Walker, who is going to give us some of his insight as an organizer and the latest developments with the Black Lives Matter movement. We're absolutely thrilled to have him.
And he's one of the leaders of the Reclaim Pride Coalition.
Okay.
They're a bunch of activists who broke off from the regular Pride Coalition because that was more of a parade. So this is more activist-based. And this year's Pride Coalition is all about Black Lives Matter.
Great.
That's happening June 28th. That's about it. And on to the show.
We're here now with activist J.W. Walker. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Hey guys, thank you for having me.
So Jay, we could tell from your background, you're one of the founders of the Queer Liberation March.
Yeah. I'm one of the
couple words on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks in the LGBTQ community, a lot of us have just gotten sick of all of the constraints of the Heritage of Pride parade. It gotten too corporate. It gotten way over policed. The NYPD was determining their route and shrinking it every year. And so after a really bad experience with them, with a whole bunch of resistance groups who marched together as a contingent in first in 2017 March, which went well. Then for the 2018 Pride Parade, they really treated us like crap and put us through the runaround for months, and then ended up having us waiting on a block until I think after 5 o'clock was when we finally stepped off. And so we had more meetings with Heritage of Pride that summer. Nothing could really go forward with them, and we decided that the Reclaim Pride Coalition would come into existence and work to do our own march that was really in the spirit of the original Christopher Street Liberation Day march, which happened exactly 50 years ago, June 28th of 1970. So last year we did that. It was an amazing success. We did that in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising. We had a great, amazing turnout. The estimates were around 45,000 people. We marched up to Central Park. We had a great rally. We heard nothing but good things about it. And so this year we were moving forward with doing the same thing, and then COVID hit. And the mayor announced that all public events would be canceled through the end of June. So we decided we still have to do something that marks the 50th anniversary of the Christopher Street Liberation March. And so we decided we were going to do virtual. So we were going to do a 4 hours of virtual content, and maybe intersperse that with a few activist actions with small numbers of people, masked and socially distanced, that we would feed into this virtual live stream for queer liberation. And then George Floyd was murdered in front of the eyes of every single person in the world. And this moment happened, and just this beautiful moment of solidarity across the city, across the state, across the country, and around the world happened. And that all started on a Thursday night. The protests went on through that weekend, and lots and lots of our members were marching in all of those different protests just on our own. And we had our next few meetings across that weekend of the different committees that were going to do the virtual presentation. We all just came to a unanimous agreement that no, we're out here marching in the streets every day right now. Why on earth would we not do a march on Pride Sunday? And we resolved to do it. We're not asking for a permit from the NYPD. Our intent is not to involve them in any part of our planning of this. We're not publicizing the start location, but it'll be a centrally located spot somewhere in Manhattan. We are planning to have tens of thousands of people show out and turn out for this march. And this march is for Black lives and against police brutality. And we're partnering with Black-led and founded organizations, both queer Black-led organizations as well as general Black-led organizations like Black Lives Matter of Greater New York. We're partnering with the People's Power Assembly, which is one of our endorsing organizations, which is a part of the Reclaim Pride Coalition. They're on board. We're doing a lot of outreach. We're orienting the entire thing toward issues of uplifting Black people, Black communities, and of fighting against police violence against all, especially all of our marginalized communities, like Black folks, like queer folks, like Latinx folks, like disabled people, deaf people. People don't realize how many deaf people get killed by police because they can't hear their orders. You know, there's one thing that the last 3.5 years have taught us is that we're in this extraordinary moment of intersectionality, where all of these people that have been fighting all of these fights for decades suddenly had one thing to bring us all together. So thank you, Donald Trump.
Jack's new ad and saying Donald Trump finally got the crowds that he wanted, and they were juxtaposing it to him talking about how big his inauguration crowd was, and showing like the title all over America and the world. It's a great short ad.
Who did it? Who put it together?
This one is also one of the Lincoln Project's ads.
Oh, the Lincoln Project. It's so annoying that the Lincoln Project, this bunch of Republicans, are the only people that are doing anything creative when it comes to advertising against Trump. It's like, DNC, what the hell? What are you doing?
Yeah.
So happy that you said that. I have that actually in the notes for, hopefully it'll make it into today's show, if not the next show. I have it there. I'm like, and I literally wrote to the outline for the show, and I said, hey, DNC, why are Republicans the only people advertising against Trump?
Well, and not only that, but the Democratic Party has the entire creative universe in this country on its side. It has every director. It has every major writer, every actor, every
Broadway person,
every Broadway. You know, it's like, why are you not? What? Oh my gosh!
It's completely insane. I think a lot of it is because the Democratic Party, they're just a bunch of pussy cats, and they're just not brave. They've lost, ever since the civil rights movement of the '60s. They've lost that kind of real, almost revolutionary part of
they really have. And
yes.
They are reasons that we want to start this podcast was because it's always like, well, we'll use the Republican framing and just hide in the corner and say, hey, is this okay if we do this? And just please don't hurt us, please don't hurt us. And and that's where we are today. And then of course, in the 90s you have the new Democrat political scientists and
Republican
historians. It was Republican light.
The DLC,
And trust me, I have a laundry list of framing issues and policy issues.
The main issue is they have to just be brave and be bold. Because the one thing, as dumb and quite frankly as kind of mentally debilitated as Trump is, the one thing he's good at is communicating. He understands that a billionaire and a pauper, they both understand the word bullshit. They both understand the word strength. And, and he realizes that, and the Dems just don't. They sometimes speak above people. They sometimes pander. They're just not real, and they're not connecting with people in a real way. And they're not pointing shit out. Like, the Republican Party is racist, period. And they have to just go that way and say, look, we're not going to listen to any bullshit about supposed voter fraud that doesn't exist.
The problem with the Democrats is that they are so beholden to money and moneyed interests that they don't want to do anything that's going to upset that cash stream. And so, especially, the DLC, I mean, that was the whole purpose of the DLC. It was to bring Wall Street money, Clinton and Clinton Gore et al. It was to bring Wall Street money into the Democratic Party in a really major way after 12 years of Reagan and Bush. Bush Senior. And, and so, and then of course we end up with Citizens United, and then the Democrats put themselves into this bizarre situation of saying that, we want to keep all that money from the above board PACs, but we're not going to take any dark money, and we're going to choose this industry. We're not going to take any money from this industry, but it's okay that we're going to take money from this industry. And that's really the employees anyway. That's not really the CEOs that are giving us the money from that. And it's just a mishmash where, which is, why so many people love Bernie Sanders, because he said, I'm not in any of that. I'm just going to rely on people to give me donations. But then you don't end up getting any sort of buy-in from the kingmakers in this country, and that's what we have, and that's the system that we have.
The kingmakers got to go. We're not a country of kings.
Yeah, absolutely. And the system works exactly how it was designed. It works perfectly.
It works for the powerful, the powerful and the wealthy.
Absolutely.
Those were the all men are created equal that they were talking about in the Declaration of Independence. Wealthy white male landowners.
Jay, we were at a meeting together at or a Zoom meeting for Rise and Resist, and you said a couple words. Do you remember what you said during that meeting?
Oh, I say so many things, Dan. We were talking about. I think we were talking about the rioting, right?
Right.
Was that the conversation? Yeah. There's this sort of natural instinct among people that have a platform to immediately, when the rioting and the looting occurred around the country, was just to immediately come out with this wholesale condemnation. That this is, this isn't what this is about, and this isn't serving George Floyd's memory, and this isn't doing this, and this isn't doing that. We have to condemn it. And and my point of view was that, since the last civil rights legislation was passed, which is 1968, it was the Fair Housing Act. That was the last big major congressional civil rights act that was passed. And that 52 years, we've had nonstop peaceful protests and demonstrations against police brutality and against systemic racism. They've gone on and on and on nonviolently, and nothing ever changes. And the other part of it is that when you have people that are experiencing massive oppression for really long periods of time, continued and sustained and never addressed, inevitably there are going to be these flashpoint moments when people get violent. When you've got people that people that are getting violence put upon them in many, many ways systemically across, whether it's through the healthcare system, where Black people are treated horrendously. Pain management is just horrid in a lot of healthcare situations, or it's police killing us on the streets or kneeling on our necks until we die. Eventually that violent behavior towards our community is going to be reflected back in some way, and that's just part of the human condition. The Black people and people fighting against racism did not create riots. As ask the survivors of the folks in the folks in Tulsa, Black Wall Street, or Rosewood. White people are very capable of starting riots, and usually for the worst possible ends, as opposed to reacting to injustice. Those riots were riots to enforce injustice or to revivify injustice. So when folks
a lot of them end up in massacres also, which we are not seeing here, even among the most quote unquote
violent.
Yeah, I mean, you can't massacre glass, okay?
Right, exactly. That's the thing. It's like property damage, vandalism, those are things. Those are not people. Those are not lives.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, a lot of white people are lucky that it wasn't violent toward them. They should be thanking their lucky stars, quite frankly, that it wasn't a lot worse, because it could have been, you know.
Yeah, well, there was this saying. There was a saying about something that I can't remember who said it, but it was that there's a reason why white people are fearful of black people. It's that white people know if they had to go through, and still were going through, all the things that black people as communities are still going through, that white people would be acting out as violently as imaginable. They would be all those arms caches that they've been hoarding for years, thanks to the NRA and all. Those would be out on the streets. They would be shooting people wildly if they had a tenth of the oppression put upon them that black people do. And so there's sort of like, oh God, is this going to be the day that the black people rise up and kill us all?
Yeah.
If you put this in historical context, you can see this as, imagine if we lost the Revolutionary War, then, what would we think of the Boston Tea Party?
Right. They were a terrorist.
That's what this is. This is a Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It was good to see you there at Union Square.
Union Square the other day, yeah.
One thing that I've thought about and that my fears are, I saw what happened years ago with Occupy Wall Street, and it fizzled out, unfortunately. My fear is that die down because there isn't one particular leader to rally behind. Is that a concern?
I understand that fear, and I guess it's in the back of everybody that's out protesting right now, in the back of everyone's minds. But this is an interestingly different moment than I think anything that we've seen really since the 60s, and more like the anti-war movement than necessarily the civil rights movement per se, in that you had it was across the country and across the globe simultaneously, and that it was a real and raw sort of expression, literally from the grassroots, like literally from just people joining together to stand up against injustice. And so I think that the grandness of it all, the fact that it's just widespread, will sustain it for a lot longer than a lot of other movements. And I think the reason for that is that, like I was saying before, we've had this whole 3.5 years of intersectionality, so that it's not, when you look at these crowds, it's the old Black Lives Matter marches were like 90% black people and 10% people who weren't black. When you go out into the streets and you see these crowds, it's it maybe 30 or 40% of the folks that are marching are black, which is I think an enormous strides. That people have really people who aren't black, who aren't actually going through this, have really been activated and understand these issues because they've been educated on these issues over the course of the last 3.5 years. It's like their natural inclination might have been environmentalism, but through the resistance, they learned about feminism, they learned about abortion issues, they learned about Black Lives Matter, they learned about queer issues. And all of these different groups came together to form, something massive, which I think is, and it needed this one special moment to galvanize it and take it to the next level. So I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's, people have been ready. People have been ready for this, this last thing that happened was the straw on the camel's back. And it was like, enough is enough. That's why you see a lot of white people coming out. And I think it's crucial because we can't do this without white people. They're still the majority, at least for a little while. So we need them to come out. If they don't come out, we're screwed. So they have to come out. And I think they're coming out in numbers like we haven't seen it ever.
Ever.
I mean,
that's true.
The other thing, which is a great trend, which is, I'm just going to throw this out there, is the expose and expunge movement, which is what I'm calling it, which is it's the decarination of the world. It's literally like white people say racist shit on social media all the time. And there are teams of Black people and allies out there finding these posts, finding these people's names, finding out where they work, tweeting their employers,
Wow.
getting them fired, getting them expelled, getting their college acceptances revoked. And it's kind of this perfect corrective, right? Because we had this president that starting with his campaign announcement, kind of has been working steadily to make it okay to be publicly racist, make it okay to be publicly bigoted,
right.
make it okay for people to say whatever
they want. That's
why
they gravitated to him, because
exactly.
Put down the dog whistle and picked up a bullhorn.
Picked up the bullhorn, exactly. Yep. And so now, they've had this 3 years of like thinking everything's okay. And they can say anything they want to. It's like that sort of ultimate white privilege place to be.
The whole party as a whole is racist, because come on, like when you look at his poll numbers within the party, they're higher than any president we've seen since Reagan.
Yeah, they're still. I think they're still around 90. Which is insane.
I wonder how much that has to do with people leaving the Republican Party, or you know what I mean? Like and that's been
interesting.
That's been something that's been going on for a while now. The sort of hard congealing on one side, on one side or the other, and kind of in both parties in some ways, but much more so in the Republicans, where the moderates are just, have just like, slowly but surely just left the party. So now all you have is these hardcore KKK-like, science denying, misogynist, homophobic, all of these sort of lunatics running the asylum, and they love themselves some Trump.
The Republican Party as it is now, unless you are a wealthy white Christian male, then they want you disenfranchised, destitute, and dead. Right. And it is the majority of the American people that are fighting just to have a life, and in many cases literally live, particularly for the Black community and people of color, which is, has always had it so much harder.
That's why the people are saying they want a living wage. Right. That's why that's so important.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, Jay, I want to ask you, when you mentioned intersectionality before, and I'm going to go into the absurd here. Let's say we end our overt racism, but then how do we get it to dignity for all, for fair housing for all, for fair wages for all, for education for all, for all the things that over the decades and decades of Reaganism and Ayn Randianism just really infecting the country? How do we get that back?
Well, it's not even how do we get that back, because we really never had it. It's, you know what I mean? It's like, you go back, look at the Gilded Age, go back and look at, look at the conditions, with white tenant farmers, in the 30s. We never really had anything approaching the equality that our ideals are supposedly set forth when the country was founded. But so what we have to do is it's reimagining what kind of a country we want. It's like the defund, the whole defund police movement is kind of a microcosm of the kinds of things that we need to do broadly, and will have effects broadly. So it's taking the ridiculous amount of money that is spent on policing and reallocating it to things like education, to affordable housing. It's about putting in laws that protect tenants and protect both commercial tenants and residential tenants. I mean, New York City, even before the COVID and the riot boarding up and all of that sort of stuff, New York City, a large swaths of New York City were already becoming like a ghost town. And I'm talking about in the middle of Manhattan, with just empty storefront after empty storefront after empty storefront. That's because we had a situation that allowed money interests to run roughshod over common sense. And that's true on a national level, it's true on a statewide level, it's true on a local level. And my hope is that, because of the intersectionality of all of these issues, that this moment of focus on police brutality and the systemic racism within policing in the United States across the board will kind of engender that discussion becoming broader and broader and broader, so that people are starting to dismantle all sorts of systems, not just systems of law enforcement.
Do you think it's possible to keep the numbers up in the protest and the pressure on?
I think that it will be. I think what will happen, I mean, we're obviously having that right now, we're having that moment of just that sort of visceral expulsion of rage,
right.
Within the culture, which is necessary. The protests will die down, but what will happen, I believe, is that the organizers will start using more strategy, start using, start doing a little bit more in the way of planning on, to get things going, moving forward. August, everything will die because August.
Yeah.
At least in New York. You know what I mean? It's like,
right.
But then I don't know what's going to happen with the political, with the conventions. I'm still a little confused. I mean, I think the Republicans still don't even know where they're going to have theirs yet. And I mean, the Democrats have settled it in place, but I think they're even struggling with exactly what they want to do and how they want to do it. But then once we get into the fall, I think that all of that planning and all of that, this past, almost 4 years of activism and organizing that's been done, is going to really come out in a big way. And I think we're going to have, 3 really solid months of people taking to the streets and of people really pushing for smart policy and really holding especially Democratic politicians' feet to the fire to really demand that they start looking at things in a different way and start expressing themselves in a far better way.
I really hope so. And the Black Lives Matter movement affects everyone, even if it doesn't affect you personally. There's the famous poem from the Holocaust of, first they came for the
Mueller.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, and the truth is that we've actually learned through practice what actually lifts all boats. The rising tide that lifts all boats. It's when you focus on uplifting the least of us. When you do policy that helps lift people out of poverty, that helps get the poorest among us better healthcare, better education. That actually is what trickles upward, because when you alleviate those stresses that exist in the poorest communities, in the most marginalized communities, you decrease crime, for one thing. You decrease negative health outcomes. And then all of those things being reduced, they put less stress on the next tier, on the sort of working class. And then by raising the wages on the poorest people, you inevitably raise the wages on the working class people, because why would I do this highly skilled labor for the same money that I could be slinging burgers at and spending my off time philosophizing? So you lift the wages of the working class people, which then makes their lives more stable, and then that raises the wages of the middle class. That's actually how you make improvements in a societal, in an economy. We continually, as a country, think that we can do just the opposite, which is make things better for the rich. And this is Democrats and Republicans. As much as Democrats, laughed about trickle down economics, and as much as George H.W. Bush called Reagan's plans voodoo economics when he was his opponent in the primaries in 1980. They always look at it that way, that we have to shore up the wealthy in order to make things better for the poor, and it's exactly the wrong thing to do. that you tax everything out of the wealthy, and
Exactly.
and use that money to uplift the poor. And then in the end, the wealthy end up making more money because you have a more a more settled society. You have a population that broadly has more buying power, that can therefore spend more money on the goods and services that the wealthy corporations are producing and giving out to the people. But there is a vested interest in not allowing that to happen, because this, just on the face of it, it ends up taking power away from the wealthy. Even if they are able to keep their wealth, their power and influence wanes because the focus is on people that don't have wealth, and that's the sort of thing that they can't stand, and that many of them will not stand for. Like police showing up at peaceful protests against police brutality and then brutalizing the protesters.
Yeah, of course. I mean, yeah. Jay, I know that we could talk for hours, I'm sure, but is there anything that you wanted to say that you didn't get a chance to?
One big thing that I am pushing for awareness about right now is the 2006 FBI bulletin that was released and then promptly buried by most of the mainstream media and the political class. The book came out was stated that organized white supremacist groups were actively infiltrating law enforcement and civil defense forces at every level. Literally the 14 years since it was done, there's been nothing done publicly about it. I haven't seen any mayors, any governors, any presidents even acknowledge it, much less lay out any sort of plan to deal with it. And we're in this space now where the mayors and police commissions are constantly talking about retraining. You cannot train someone out of being a white supremacist and into being a racist, okay?
That's a fucking bumper sticker, my friend.
Right? But you have to root them out. You have to say, these people do not belong here. We have to get rid of them. You have to do a full bore investigation into every police force, which is another part. That's part of what the whole abolish police, abolish the police and the defund the police is going to have to entail. They're gonna have to be going in. If you see like what's that tattoo that the white supremacists always like to